quite simple. I want to talk about the poster presentations, though, before we go any further. People have been approaching me about their topics and their abstracts, which is great. Continue to do so. If you're uncertain, that's what I'm here for. I'm a little concerned about a couple of abstracts that were sent to me in draft form. I want to be clear what the purpose of the assignment is. So it is not to propose a research project. I've seen a couple where people are saying, well, we're going to collect these data. No, you're not going to collect shit. That's not what we're doing. The purpose of this assignment is to phrase a well-structured research question and then a methodology for answering that question using the literature, and then to do so. And the methodology you're all going to use is something resembling a systematic review. Right? It's not truly a systematic review, and I encourage you not to use that term because some judges get anal about that. So we made up the term structured review instead. And so what is required of you is to establish rigor in the phrasing of the question, and I really advocate specificity, and then rigor in how you express your inclusion-exclusion criteria, and then to conduct the search, extracting the appropriate information, and synthesizing it in a creative, intelligent fashion, and answering the question. Okay, so this is creativity is at play, and the creativity here is the kind of question that you ask and what wisdom you extract from it. But beyond the creativity, you're being judged on the rigor of your systematic approach. So this is not your second year research methods class. This is epidemiology, where rigor is king. So at the end of this, you will have answered a question, hopefully that is novel enough that maybe you want to consider seeking publication. In the past, we get maybe one every year that gets published somewhere. Right? So this is not, it's not necessarily a joke. This is actually good stuff, and hopefully most of you will submit your posters at the end of all this in the University of Ottawa repository, which, by the way, gets a lot of traffic. The librarian recently contacted me and told me it's one of the most searched databases in the university, this repository of fourth-year epidemiology projects. So people are actually citing the work produced in this class, which is terrifying, right? This is informing actual science. But yeah, so that's your goal here. You're not proposing a project. You're actually doing a project. And that project will all have exactly the same methodology, a structured, quasi-systematic review. And what you're going to be judged on is, again, how transparent you are in what you intend to do, whether or not you did what you intended to do, and how you answered the question. Remember that the purpose of a method section is to give sufficient information for somebody else reading this to do what you did, and hopefully get the same answers that you did. That's why science is all about reproducibility. How you describe the methods, the transparency of your methods is critical to the reproducibility in science. For your abstracts, quite honestly, I'm not going to mark the abstracts. The deadline is there to make sure you get something in. And you get the mark if you get something in, and it's not gibberish. Okay, so people are concerned, is this sufficient? Is this good? It's fine, don't worry. Your abstract is fine if it's the same thing you intend more or less to present in 2 weeks. Okay, so I'll say it again. The 19th deadline is just to make sure that you have started already. And, you know, because I don't want to see people doing this the night before, it'll be shit if it is. So start early. Any questions about the posters? So feel free to email me stuff. Yes?
I just want to clarify, we're only submitting one abstract per group.
Per group, that is correct. That is correct, yes. And people have asked, can they revise it for the 5th? Yeah, you can revise it. Not too much, I hope. It's just that the version you submit on the 19th is the one we will likely publish. Because I don't know if you digested that fact, but every year we try to publish a book of abstracts that you can cite in your resume. This is all for you. So the best quality you get on the 19th is better for your career because this will be cited and people will read it. And it's fine if you haven't got all your results in. You can just whatever you got already. Whatever you got already is okay. You can update that come presentation time. Any further questions? Good. Okay, so I know already we have a grand total of 3 abstracts submitted. Yay, 3. So I expect to see all of them on the 19th. And the reason, again, we want the 19th deadline is to have time to schedule everything appropriately. And the other classes give me a headache because they want to always, we want to make sure that this guy is and that guy. So stop it. Just stop it. So if I shouldn't record that. That's not good. If I end up strangling another professor, you read about the papers and you know why. Okay, moving on. Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. Today's topic, really fun, really easy, really fast, and probably a review for most of you. We're talking about experiments and randomization, critical components of the quest for knowledge in today's medical fields. And a big part of what clinical epidemiologists do is designing randomized controlled trials. What I'm going to present to you is a fairly introductory level of how we go about doing so, but it gives you a taste of how complex the field becomes. And a lot of money is thrown at this every year in making it even more complicated, because this is all about really assessing the quality of drugs. And as you know, that's a $1 trillion industry. So a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of brain power is put into trying to get as much wisdom about the quality and effectiveness of drugs. So first, let's talk a bit about your posters again. So how to phrase it, what the components are. And I suggest to you that the scientific process kind of flows this way. It doesn't really, but we can pretend that it does. Right? I mean, the scientific method that you heard about in public school, hopefully, it began with, hey, I've observed something in the world. I now have got a hypothesis. I'm going to test, and I do so, and then I extrapolate a general rule about the universe. That's how we think the world works. Newton sat under a tree, and the apple fell on him, and oh, gravity, right? It didn't work that way, obviously. But we pretend. So there's an idea or an observation. All the pygmies with doofus disease are all left-handed. Look at that. Interesting. An hypothesis, maybe left-handed pygmies are likely to have doofus disease. That's a creative component. A research question, what's the prevalence of doofus disease among left-handed, right-handed pygmies in the Valley of Diamandia? And the data source, well, maybe there's patient records from the doofus disease clinics in Greater Diamandia. You design it, maybe a cross-sectional cohort, and you have a project. That's the way we assume science tends to unfold. And by the way, there's a couple of points here in which the human brain, the intelligence, the creativity interjects itself. The first is hypothesization, and the last is generalization, which is not here. So it's one thing for Newton to have seen the apple fall. It's quite another to say, maybe there's a force pulling it down. That takes creativity. And to go from that observation of the experiments to maybe there's a general rule about gravity applying to all objects is further creativity. So the scientific process, we think, is mechanized, but at least two components here has a strong sense of the human intelligence and creativity. So for some reason, this slide has been mutated, and we've got like words that should be in one line that aren't, which makes it a little more artistic. So I'll suggest to you that in general we flow this way from topic to question to hypothesis. And some people will say that these two are flipped. I don't think so, but we're going to go with this right now. So a topic is broad. So people come to me already asking about, is this a good topic for your poster? Sure it is. Something broad is fine. That's what we'll be discussing at the end of all this. Someone just talked about social media and depression. That's a great topic. Okay, we'll talk, maybe all the time I spend on Facebook is making me depressed. Probably is. Right? So the question is, maybe there's an association between my access to Twitter and Facebook and clinical depression. That's what I'm going to answer at the end of all this. But the hypothesis is something testable, something specific, something that preferably has a measurable component to it. And that usually is where I perform statistics. Those are the differences between those three things. For example, research topic, physical activity and cardiovascular disease. We can discuss this till the cows come home. A number of podcasts will discuss, hey, we need to move more to have less heart disease. The research problem is, maybe there's a link between those two. Research question is, 30 minutes of moderate activity produces hypertension, whatever. And the hypothesis is an answerable subject that's very specific. Now, there's a lot of flow between these two things. And again, depending on who you ask, they're kind of the same thing. Doesn't matter. For your projects, you're going to go straight to a research question which resembles an hypothesis that is answerable and testable using the PICO method. But this is the kind of stuff that we like to see in a method section. Exactly what I need to do to reproduce this study to get the same results. Okay, so a poster example. Topic, autism and diet. Question, is eating cheese within the first years of life associated with having autism? Monthly reports. Method, we're going to search literature. Results. Okay, so this is another nuance that a lot of students kind of have a struggle with. The results of your project are the papers that you find. Because What did you do? You searched for some papers. What are the results of that search? X number of papers. Okay, the result isn't the conclusions. You can say that from these results, between papers, X number said this, X number said that. At the end of the day, our conclusions is, on average, most of them said this, whatever it is. Okay, so keep in mind, the result is the result of what you did. And the conclusions is the answer to the question. Okay? Logic. So today, we're going to look at clinical trials, experiments. I like a joke, but less funny. Good times. Okay, again, this is one of my favorite slides, and it's all shifted over for some reason. So I will suggest to you that in the research world, we have qualitative and quantitative data. I've shown this slide before. In epidemiology, we tend to look at quantitative data. So in the quantitative world, we have descriptive and analytical studies. Descriptive is who, what, where, and when. Analysis is whenever we associate two or more variables. So amongst the analyses, we have observational and experimental studies. So the observational ones we've done already. The case control, the cohort, the cross-sectional. Observation, again, is when we let the world unfold as it will naturally, and we simply observe the world be as it is. But the experiment is when we intervene. Interventional studies are sometimes called because we intervene. We make a group take a drug, we make a group not take a drug, or something of that nature. So this is what we're talking about today, the interventions. And again, I'll draw your attention to the pyramid of evidence. And if you progress in the health sciences, in whatever field, the pyramid of evidence will return to you sometimes as a friend, sometimes as a lover, sometimes as a tortured nightmare. But learn to love it, because it will be your friend if you treat it nicely. In the pyramid of evidence, we have expert opinion at the bottom, observational studies in the middle. At the top, depending on who you speak to, either systematic reviews or clinical trials. Orthodox thinkers say that systematic reviews based on good randomized controlled trials are the best evidence. I know some experts who would say, yeah, it's true. However, I would rather have a really well-designed, perfect experiment rather than a systematic review based on some lesser quality experiments. Okay, so there's some debate here. And I think I mentioned to you before that in real life, where decisions are made, it's pretty much reversed. So the component of today's lecture that I'm not going to give you, but probably give you next week instead, is on how we use epidemiology for decision-making, decision analysis. And with the decision analysis, it's the reverse of this. Look at the way that parliamentarians make decisions. It's never based on, well, the CADA put out a systematic review on this topic. No, it's always like, I spoke to Dr. such and such, and he said this. So expert opinion tends to carry the day in real life, which is a problem. But as scientists, we know this is the way things should be happening. So randomized trials are used to evaluate things. What kind of things? Well, drugs typically, medical interventions typically, but it could be anything. It could be educational interventions. It can be programs. It could be radio broadcasts. It can be all kinds of policies. It is the go-to strategy for any kind of evaluation. You will see, though, that it's not possible to do randomized trials for a lot of things by their very nature. It's definitely not possible to do blinded trials for a lot of things by their nature, but we'll get there. So we can use it in a clinical setting, meaning in a hospital. These patients get this, those patients get that. Or in a community setting, people in that community center get this, people in this neighborhood get that, whatever it might be. And usually we refer to it as drugs, but it doesn't have to be drugs. So we can use it to evaluate things. We can use it to assess programs. You can use it to assess ways of delivering care. I encourage you, when you read the paper, as I assume you all do on a regular basis, to look at when we talk about government of Ontario is assessing a new thing that they're putting forward, and look at how they're doing that assessment. You will see there's always going to be a study design associated with it. At the end of today's lecture, again, this course, hopefully you will be expert enough to look at the pros and cons of the various designs that are put forward. So a randomized trial essentially begins this way. You have a population, maybe it's people with a certain disease. You randomize one group to get something and another group to get something else. Right? One group typically gets treatment, the other group gets something else. So either we can have controls in this group, or we can get people getting the current treatment, people getting a new treatment. And we'll go over that means in a second. And we compare the groups to see how well they're doing. Okay, so it looks like this. Again, I apologize, the slide is kind of screwed up for some reason. Things should line up better. Study population, right? A bunch of you. I randomize you into two groups. How do I randomize? The second half of today we'll talk about randomization methods. But in general, the easiest way is I flip a coin. So a partner comes to me, I flip a coin, I get heads, she gets up in that group. Then somebody else comes to me, I flip a coin, you get in that group, and so forth, right? So randomly they get the treatment. This is the intervention component of the study that makes it an experiment. The fact that I have flipped a coin and told you where to go. If, on the other hand, I watched you and see where you ended up naturally, then it would be an observational study. But I flipped the coin and told you where to go. So we're going to talk about why we randomize and why we do blinding as well, before we talk about what these people are getting. So we think of the randomized control trial as the gold standard, and you hear that term throughout your careers. And it's mostly true, but not entirely true. And we think of it as being the best way to assess causality. Why? Because we know pretty much the temporal relationship. We know what came first. If I'm testing, let's say whether a drug prevents headaches or not, okay, and so I randomize you into two groups, and you're all migraine sufferers, and I give one group my headache prevention drug, and the other one doesn't get it, and after a year, I see who got headaches, who doesn't. I know what came first. I know whether you got the drug first or not, right? So I've controlled temporality. Extraneous variables are well controlled. So now, because I let you into the study, if it's a clinical study, I can control your exposures. I can say from now on, because I'm looking for headaches, no red wine for any of you, right? Or no dark chocolate, or the things that I know that trigger migraines. Okay, so I can control for those things. Or maybe make sure everyone gets a good night's sleep, because those are other things that control for headaches. Or make sure that there are equal numbers of men and women, because there's a gender effect as well. We'll get there. So we can do a lot of interesting controls to prevent criticism of bias. If it's blinded, conclusions are difficult to argue with. We'll talk about blinding. What is blinding? There are three kinds of blinding, by the way. Single blinding, double blinding, and triple blinding. Remember this from your second or third year methods class? What's single and double blinding? Someone tell me what the difference is. Yes?
Single blinding the people that you're administering drugs to don't know which one they're getting.
That's right.
Double blinding is supposed to researchers and the participants don't know.
That's right. Now it's triple blinding. Have you heard that before? Yes.
Isn't that like the statistician that's looking at the results afterwards, away from that position? He doesn't know which group.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. That's a relatively new thing. So triple blinding, you don't hear about that in textbooks, but we do that as well. Make sure that the person doing the analysis doesn't know, just to give that last bit of control and prevention of bias. Because, if I'm working for a drug company and I'm a statistician, maybe I'll get round this one up and round that one down, unconsciously. The great disadvantage is that these things are really expensive to do, especially to do well. And that's why drug companies are the ones that do the drug trials, because drug companies are crazy rich. And people always ask, how come the government doesn't compel or do their own drug discovery when it comes to things like antibiotic resistance, because there's a great need for new antibiotics. That's crazy expensive. And unless there is a market advantage by which a company can recoup its losses, it's unlikely they'll feel compelled to pay for these studies. Another disadvantage is that it doesn't really reflect the real world. So I said that if you're in my headache study, I'm going to prevent you from eating dark chocolate and drinking red wine and making sure you get 8 hours sleep per night and not watch too much TV, etc., 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 to make sure that any headache effects I see are due to the drug or not. In real life, of course, you'll be drinking your red wine, eating your dark chocolate, watching TV, and not sleeping, because that's what you do. That's what I do anyway, right? So it doesn't represent the real world, therefore, is it truly valid? And we'll talk about validity in a bit, too. And lastly, ethics. So earlier, I said that we don't really know that smoking causes cancer, even though we know that smoking causes cancer. because we can't do the randomized controlled trial where I take some newborns and make them smoke for 20 years, right? I can't do that ethically. So I can't be absolutely 100% certain that smoking causes cancer, even though I'm absolutely 99.99% certain smoking causes cancer. Okay, so ethics sometimes prevents us from doing some things with randomized controlled trials. So the idea of a random assignment is that each person in my population has an equivalent chance of being in either treatment group or the placebo group. And it does not presume, though, that everybody is the same. It doesn't presume that the person who ends up here has exactly the same characteristics as the person who ends up there. And so it doesn't guarantee equivalence. It doesn't guarantee definitely balance, I mean, same numbers of people. But what it does tend to say is, on average, the things I don't know about are going to be more or less equally distributed. So if I think that women are more likely than men to get migraines, and I'm really concerned that in my migraine example here, if this group has more women than men, and this group has more men than women, there's going to be a bias towards finding more headaches in this group. And if this is my control group, and that's my treatment group, it's going to really look like my drug really works great, because my treatment group doesn't have any headaches at all, my control group's got. So that's a bias against the null. Okay, so one way to control for that bias is to make sure that I'm stratifying my randomization. We'll see how that looks when we talk about randomization. I can make sure that I randomize all the men first, then I randomize all the women first. If I'm concerned that maybe age is a factor, that old people will have more migraines than young people, I'll make sure I stratify the old people first, then randomize the old people, then randomize young people second, to make sure they're equal distributions. So any factor that I think is going to be a confounder, I can randomize separately. But those are only the factors that I know about. Okay? Science isn't perfect. We don't know about everything that might affect migraines. It might be possible that there's a genetic predisposition among some people. It might be possible that maybe your hair color is a factor that determines migraine. Who knows? But if I randomize, I stand a better chance of getting more or less equal distribution of those factors that I don't know about. That's the power of randomization. It really limits the possibility of bias in terms of characteristics being distributed unequally in both groups. Okay, so when it comes to analysis, there's a couple of possibilities here. Believe it or not, when we do a randomized controlled trial, sometimes people leave the study and sometimes people cross over groups. So if you start off in the treatment group, sometimes we'll switch you over into the control group and vice versa. I can't think of any examples right off the top of my head. It happens rarely, but it does happen. Sometimes you have this thing called crossover trials where we make sure that happens, so your own control group. More commonly, we truncate studies. And we say that, these people here, they're not doing so well, we'll just take them off the drug entirely, they're out of the study. Right? We pretend that they're not here anymore. It happens a lot. And my girlfriend's actually looking at a study right now on truncated studies in general. And according to a systematic review we found, truncated studies tend to be repeated more often, thus costing more money. It's complicated. What I'm getting at is this. When it comes to people who don't finish the routine or people who cross over from one group to another, how do you analyze that? And there are two possibilities. You can analyze them based on the treatment they actually got, or you can analyze them based on the treatment you intended for them to get. Okay? So let's back up for a second. If I'm randomizing everybody into two groups, so a partner comes to me, I flip a coin, she goes from this group versus that group, and suddenly I put her in the control group, but later on, for some reason, we put her in the treatment group later on because maybe we had too many here and moved over, which is a bad thing to do. So do I include her results with the other people in the treatment group, or do I include her results where she started out in the control group? So the two kinds of approaches are, one is called the per protocol or the on protocol analysis. That's when we analyze her based on what she actually got. So if she got the placebo, then we include her in the placebo group. The alternative is the intention to treat analysis. And the intention to treat says, if you randomize, you analyze, meaning The original group that you started out in, that's where you keep you, regardless of what you got. This is considered to be the more scientifically rigorous approach, the intention to treat, because it is conservative. It is less likely to find an effect. And in science, we tend to make it difficult for us to find an effect, to always try to bias ourselves toward the null rather than away from the null. Okay? So the phrase is, if you randomize, you analyze. Meaning, once I randomize you into a group, you stay in that group, even though you didn't stay in that group. Moving on. So, control groups. Control groups, obviously we all know why we need a control group. This is the essence of science. Okay? And very often, the control group is either an intervention, no intervention, or a placebo. Okay. What's a placebo? Remember this from your second year research methods class? Did you learn about this? Do we teach about science? Placebo? Yes.
Like the example of a pill that doesn't have any actual medicinal properties.
Exactly right. Now, why would we want that? Sure, yeah, why not?
So it's sort of, you can really see if the medication itself has an effect or if it's just the mentality of taking the treatment that affects the outcome.
That's right, that's exactly right. So in the word is the Greek for I please. So that's the pill that pleases you, right? And historically, is a sugar pill of some kind, right? Because sugar pills are inoffensive. We like the placebo to look exactly like the actual drug. It's going to have the same branding, the same color, the same size. So you can't tell, you cannot convince yourself or see what your friends get. We got a different pill for me, right? Placebos we don't really use them that much, to be honest. Because think about this. There is a new hypertension drug that comes out by a drug company, and the existing standard drug is Diovan, which is really well tolerated, but lowers hypertension by say 10 points. And the new drug we think will lower it by 15 points. So we're going to compare it to what? To placebo, to nothing, or to Diovan. Which one should we compare it to? So the new drug is drug X. You have three options. We compare it to nothing, meaning that you guys get nothing at all, and your friends here will get the new drug, or you'll get a placebo, meaning you'll get a sugar pill that looks like the new drug but isn't, or you'll get Diovan, the existing standard care. What should they get? Yeah?
The existing standard.
Why is that?
Like ethically, you can't give them less than the standard.
There are two reasons. You're absolutely right. So the main reason ethically. These are people who suffer from hypertension and cardiovascular disease, so we give them nothing, well, they're going to die. So it's ethically, much more ethical to say, well, you continue taking the thing that we know works. Right? So at the very least, you'll get the thing that we know works. And at the very best, you'll get something that works better. Okay? But there's another reason, too, a more practical reason. Can you see it? Yeah? Or you? Exactly right. What's the point of, because pretty much everything works better than nothing at this stage in pharmacological development. Anything we develop works better than nothing. And everything we develop works better than placebo. So what we really want is something that works better than what's currently on the market. Otherwise, well, what's the point? So very commonly, we develop drugs that work just as well as what's on the market. It's just rarer to find some things that work extraordinarily better than what's on the market. And that's what drug companies want. That's where the money is. Okay, so that's why we do that. Okay, here's some little history for you. An unplanned trial. I'll just read this quickly. This is from 16th century. This was a surgeon saying, "At length my oil lacked and I was constrained to apply in its place a digestive made of yolks and eggs, oil of roses and turpentine. That night I could not sleep at my ease, fearing that by lack of cauterization I would find the wounded upon which I had used the oil dead from the poison. I raised myself early to visit them, when beyond my hope I found those who might apply the medicament feeling but little pain, their wounds neither swollen nor inflamed, and having slept through the night. The others too might apply the boiling oil or feverish." So the long and short of this is that he had two groups of patients with open wounds, and one he was pouring boiling oil into, and the other he was applying this medicament of egg yolks and turpentine. And he found that the ones that didn't have boiling oil were happier and not as badly scalded. So that's a very simple unplanned trial, right? And he did so because he ran out of boiling oil. That's an unplanned trial. A planned trial, and this is a famous story of how they discovered that limes prevent scurvy. That's why the British naval officers are called limeys. So this is surgeons from the 18th century. He took 12 patients in the scurvy on board the HMS Salisbury. 2 of them had a quarter of cider per day. 2 of them took 25 bits of whatever that is. 2 of them took vinegar, and 2 of them drank seawater, and 2 of them had oranges and lemons. And 2 of them took a bigness of nutmeg. I measure things in bignesses as well. That's great. And so the good effects were found amongst the lemons. Right? So this is a planned trial. This is the first semblance of something resembling science. Of course, the sample sizes were quite poor. It just happens that because these other things will give you no results, and the lime gives great result, the effect size was so great that these sample sizes are sufficient. For most things, the sample size would be poor. Okay? But this is, again, a historical case of us learning how to do clinical trials and finding out that, in fact, sample size of 2 is sufficient. This is a curious story. So one day when I was a junior medical student, a very important Boston surgeon visited the school and delivered a great treatise on a large number of patients who had undergone operations. At the end of the lecture, a young student in the back asked, "Did you have any controls?" And the great surgeon said, "Do you mean, did I not operate on half the patients?" And the voice in the back said, "Yes, that's what I had in mind." And the visitor's fist came down and said, "Of course not. That would have doomed half of them to their death." And he replied, "But which half?" It's a funny story. It's pretty not to you guys. Good times. Okay. This is a perhaps more easily appreciated story. A sea captain was given samples of anti-nausea pills to test during a voyage. The need for controls was carefully explained to him. Upon return of the ship, the captain reported the results enthusiastically. Every one of the controls was ill, and not one of the subjects had any trouble. Really wonderful stuff, meaning the pill worked to prevent nausea. A skeptic asked how he had chosen the controls, and he said, "Oh, I gave the stuff to my seamen and used the passengers as controls." So, where is the bias in that study? Back? That's exactly right. So the choice of the controls here biased the study against the null hypothesis. You're more likely to find an effect. All right, cool stuff. So we can select non-randomized controls as well, and all these have problems associated with them. So there are trials and there are randomized trials. These are non-randomized trials, so you can base your selection on the day's admission. Sorry, what happened?
Your mic is dying.
Oh, yeah? Are we back? You guys didn't seem too enthused about telling me, like, oh, we got to hear me anymore. That's great. Okay, so I won't go too deep into this. It's just that there are different ways of selecting people in your study. One way is to put a desk in front of the hospital and say, on Tuesdays, I'll accept people and they'll be in my study group, and on Wednesdays, I'll accept people in my control group. Right? Or we can say, like, every other person who walks through the door will be study versus control. The problem there is people come in clusters. Different days have different kinds of people involved in clinics. Anytime that you can predict who the next control is going to be, it's problematic. Right? So people still do this. These are not the best ways of going about it. There's a famous case of testing the TB vaccination in New York City, where there's a non-randomized process being used that biased them towards finding a positive result, which there wasn't one. I won't go through that looks like. So when we're randomizing, there are a few issues. First is balance. Balance means, do we have the same number of people in both groups? Right? And there are different ways of randomizing, as I'm going to show you, that assure that we have balance, but the common ways don't assure. Simple randomization, flipping a coin, it's possible that I'll get 12 heads in a row, followed by 2 tails. So if I got 14 people to choose from, so I've got 12 in one group and 2 in the other. So that's not great. That's poor balance. Bias, well, there's selection bias, meaning it's possible for me to get all men over here and a woman over there. That's selection bias, and that's accidental. Okay. Another kind of selection bias would be if on the day of recruitment, maybe all men show up, women don't show up or something. So we need to have a process by which even the pool we are selecting from is representative of the larger population. And we're going to go through these in a bit, the kinds of randomization. Not a whole lot, but coin tossing is the obvious one that's historically thought about. Bermuda block randomization, we'll talk about that in the second half this evening. Table of random numbers. So the Rand Corporation used to publish big books of random numbers. I used to have one in my office, a book of random numbers. Isn't that crazy? That's what companies used to make money on, books of random numbers. And you just, right? And they give that person a number, and if it's odd, they be in this group, and if it's even, they'll be in. That's how things work. There's urn randomization, where we actually have urns with people like IDs in them, and we can stratify the urns by different characteristics and randomly choose. Covariate and outcome adaptive. That refers to, are we going to, again, attempt to make sure that different predictive variables are equally distributed. So with covariate adaptive, I can say, first I'm going to make sure that we have equal amounts of things that I find important, like men and women or young and old. With outcome adaptive, if I know that some people are going to respond to my drug in a certain way, like I'm testing for headache, but I know that this drug has an effect on skin rash. So I make sure that I have equal distributions of skin rash, right? So I can either try to stratify it by the covariate or by the outcome. And this thing called allocation concealment. This is how we blind. This is a fancy word for blinding, and there are different ways of blinding. Most commonly, it used to be envelopes, sealed envelopes. We put your information in an envelope, put it in a safe, and we literally break the seal at the end of the study. And we call it, you break the seal early if we need to know if someone's doing it. If someone is responding really oddly, we have to figure out, are they on the drug or the placebo? We break the seal and find out, and remove them from the study. Right? Or you put the data inside containers and seal them away. There are all kinds of really simplistic grade school methods that used to be used. Nowadays, they're all computerized. Everything's electronically stored. But back in the day, and the day was like 10 years ago, everything was literally in sealed envelopes. So blinding. Blinding, of course, is when, we talked about this, you don't know what you got, I don't know what I gave you. If you don't know what you got, that's single blind, and if I don't know what you got, that's double blinding. Okay. There are all kinds of biases, though, and the two most important ones when it comes to RCTs are Hawthorne effect and Rosenthal effect. You've heard of this before, right, in your recent methods class, I assume? Yeah, no, yeah, no, maybe? No confirmation? Okay, cool. Hawthorne effect comes historically from the Hawthorne Works factory, where it was found that when they turned up the lights, people worked harder, because suddenly they said, oh, the boss can see me, I better be more productive. Right? So in other words, if you're being observed, your behavior changes. What does that mean for blinding? It means that if you know what group you're in, your behavior might change. You know you're being observed. If you know you're getting the pill that prevents the headaches, maybe I won't perceive I'm getting any headaches. I expect not to get any. Rosenthal effect is also called Pygmalion effect. It comes from a Greek myth, or the self-fulfilling prophecy effect. And that's when, if I know what I'm giving you, maybe I'm treating you differently. The classic story goes like this. If you go to a school and you tell the teachers, look out for those students over there. They're really smart, and we really think that in 5 years they might be geniuses. So just keep your eye on them and report back to us if they're doing well or not. And the funny thing is, even if the kids are dumbasses, the teachers will respond to them as if they are geniuses. And as a result, the kids will feel like geniuses and maybe start behaving like geniuses. In other words, the teachers started treating the kids the way that the researchers expected or wanted them to. So that's Rosenthal effect. That's why blinding the researcher is important, so I don't treat you any differently. Think about it this way. If I am doing a study testing my new wonder drug, and I know that you guys got my wonder drug and you guys didn't, I'm going to give you a lot of attention. because I want my drug to work. You feel better, right? You feel better, right? Yeah, no, how about you? You feel bad? You feel bad, don't you? You feel really bad. So I have it in my best interest to skew the results. Rosenthal effect is skewness by the researcher. Hawthorne effect, skewness by the participant. So a blinding component. Okay, so that's historical context for Hawthorne and Rosenthal. Placebo, I mentioned, is comes from the Greek "I please." When doctors do it, it's ethically complex because Hippocratic Oath says you're supposed to do no good and do no bad and always try to do good. So how am I doing good if I'm giving you nothing and telling you something, right? Placebo effect, you've heard of this. It's controversial. I mean, I have colleagues who insist it doesn't exist. I have other colleagues who insist it's all that there is. I have one colleague who is so opposed to placebo effect, he says it only ever works on perceptual things, not on measurable things. For example, it works on pain scales or happiness scales or things like that, never on things we can truly measure, like serum measurements of things. Right? So it's entirely a psychological effect. Sometimes it's called the physiological effect produced by placebo. Why? Because it's a thing that's happening in your body. It's not the placebo doing it, it's the thing your body is doing. I want you to think about how it's relevant to some things like homeopathy. I'll talk about homeopathy in a bit. Homeopathy, if you don't know, is bullshit. And I will convince you of that before this day is over. So the argument is that people who feel good when exposed to fake medicine do good because of perceptual issues. They think they're getting something, so they naturally feel good about it. We wrote a paper on BMJ 12 years ago, 13 years ago, where we suggested that there may be some other kind of placebo effect going on. By the way, my colleague here, Nick Barrowman, who, maybe I'll bring him in here, he's a statistician at CHIO. He's the one who insists that placebo effect isn't real. But we do suggest that if you're in a study that's double-blinded and you start feeling better, then maybe you can ascertain that you are on the drug and not on the control. And if you're smart enough to figure that out, maybe that will make you feel even better, right? So having determined your own treatment, you have accelerated your improvement via placebo effect. So we suggested this is a placebo paradox. Didn't catch on, so whatever, we got it published. If we are conducting a perfect clinical trial, we hope that it has these characteristics, that there is a solid scientific rationale based on literature. Because I can do a clinical trial for anything. I can test whether or not your hair grows faster if you spend more time on Facebook. It's nonsense, right? But it doesn't mean anything. But is there a scientific rationale? And don't use that as a study question. Hair growth and record. Right? So we have a testable hypothesis. That's measurable. It's got numbers in it. It's prospective, meaning we're going forwards in time, obviously. You've got a strong control group. You've randomized. You've blinded a lot of people. The sample size is sufficient. We're going to have a lecture later on how to compute sample size, what that means. You have rational inclusion and exclusion criteria. Why? Because you don't want to exclude too many things because you'll lose validity. And it's going to be ethical. And of course, we have the right analytical protocol. There are different ways of assessing the quality of an RCT. Here at UAGWA, one of my former mentors, David Moore, developed something called the consort statement, which is now the global standard. Consort statement is essentially a checklist. And you can use this in your poster presentation if you're using RCTs to assess the quality of your RCTs. Consort also makes checklists for other kinds of studies as well, but they're famous for the RCT. I won't go in depth about this, but just know that it's a checklist with criteria that we use to assess the quality of an experiment. So when I review a paper for a journal, for example, I'm a lazy guy. If it's an RCT, I go straight to the checklist. Yeah, there it is. And it looks like this. We've got the, do they do these things? Are they randomized? Do they have allocation issues? Are they followed up? Is the analysis appropriate? Okay. They looked at things like how much randomization is there? Is the sample size sufficient? Are there rules for stopping, meaning when do we pull someone out of the study? At what point are there side effects so serious we have to pull them out? Or at what point is something so gruesome for them we have to pull them out? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Also, there's something called the Haddad Score. And this is a score from 0 to 5, which tells us essentially the degree of randomization and blindedness. So was it randomized, was it blinded, and were the withdrawals and dropouts described? Notice this is about are things described, not whether or not they were actually done. It's possible to do a study perfectly, but when you write it up, not express how perfect it was, which is why transparency in your methods is so important. When you do a systematic review, we don't judge the quality of the experiment, we judge the quality of the experiment as it was described in the study. We don't call up the guy and say, hey, did you actually do this? No, we trust what he wrote down. So when we're assessing the quality, we look at what was written. Did you describe it as randomized? Maybe it was, but if they didn't say it, we can't say they did. Okay, so that's important. So Haddad is another common checklist for assessing the quality of an RCT. But then again, we have like criticisms, they're simplistic, maybe too much effort put on the blinding aspects of it, right? But why are they so important? Because we need something. We need some kind of tool to assess the quality of these things, especially for the reviews like the ones you're doing. And I encourage you, when doing your project, to establish your own checklist. Wouldn't that be great? To say, we have this generic list of things that all our studies must conform to. Yes, for that?
How do you rate whether or not the study is described as double blind? How does one rate that on a scale of 1 to 5?
No, at the end of the checklist is 1 to 5, right? But one of the items is it rated as double blind? Yes or no? Right, got that? And the other things on there for that. Among the things on the list is the title descriptive? Is the abstract thorough? Right. So many of this actually describing the quality of the paper, not so much the quality of the science. So we talked about the Cochrane collaboration briefly, and we talked about systematic reviews, but the Cochrane collaboration tends to favor systematic reviews with strong randomized controlled trials, and you can go to their website and look up some stuff if you want. The philosophy of RCT is important. Many things can't be randomized. Many things can't have a placebo, philosophically. We have to, when we break placebo, that's important. And the logic. So this is where we talk about alternative medicine. I'm a fan of alternative medicine. One of my hobbies is I try wacky therapies every few weeks, and I write about it on my blog, because why not? My favorite was quantum beam therapy. I said, no, I'm not paying money for that. But my other favorite one I did pay money for is something called Bowen therapy. Bowen therapy is where you lie on a table, and again, I'm recording this, and someone's going to write to you and be angry, but you're lying on a table, and then they come and they put a sheet over you, and I knew I was in for a wacky time when a woman says, this is not to keep you warm, this is to keep your energies intact. Oh, fuck. Then they touch you on the shoulder, leave the room, and come back. How do you feel? Like I wasted $60. That's what I feel. And the idea is you're setting your muscle fibers back to the factory default setting. It's nonsense, but I figured I'd give them a try, and I paid for the full 3 treatments just so I could mock them. And but some alternative therapies I'm rather quite a fan of. Like I'm doing Rolfing right now. You know what Rolfing is? Well, it's not puking. Rolfing is it's really painful deep tissue massage where some very large man sticks his elbow deep in your, it's horrible. It's fantastically horrible, right? And but Rolfing is considered by some to be alternative medicine because it's also used as psychotherapy because it sends you back to a time of trauma. It's so painful. I enjoy it. But I'm off on a tangent. With alternative medicine, part of the issue is if it's proven by an RCT, it's no longer alternative, it's mainstream medicine. Some things have a hard time being proven by RCTs because it's not the intervention that's the medicine, it's the experience. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're going to get something wacky. Maybe it's quantum beam therapy again, which is literally putting the beams on your forehead, right? And but you show up, and they meet you in the lobby, and it's a lovely place. It's a garden. They give you some green tea, there's light music, and you sit down and you meditate for a while. Someone comes, they ask you who you are, they hold your hand, they talk to you. Then they go in the back, they put a bean on your fucking forehead, right? And in a randomized controlled trial environment, what they would do is they put you in 2 different rooms. One you get to be in the forehead, the other one doesn't, and we'll see which one of you gets better. Obviously, no one's getting better. It fails. However, The true intervention isn't the bean on your forehead, it's the entire showing up, having your green tea, sitting in the garden, talking to the guy, having your hand held, right? That's what the intervention is. So if that were incorporated into the trials, then maybe you'd see an effect. So it's difficult with alternative medical paradigms and ways of thinking to separate out the intervention from the experience. So that's the caveat that I will give as I go forth now and slaughter homeopathy. So, oh, you know what? There's a video I want to show you. It's really kind of cool. Maybe you've seen it before. Maybe you've seen it before. Let me see here. Get over here. There's no sound. What? There's no sound. What's going on here? It's not working. Okay, well, it's not working. Too bad. So watch it on your own. So what it is, it's a British comedy about homeopathic ER. It's pretty funny. So just Google homeopathic A&E. A&E in England's accident and emergency. Okay, so there's all kinds of RCTs out there attempting to assess the quality of homeopathy. And it's nonsensical. But before we get there, there's some issues with RCTs and how they're used to generalize therapies in society. For example, what kinds of people will you recruit for your study? If your study is about depression, okay, only 22% of depressed people will actually qualify to be an RCT, because if you're too depressed, you probably will skew the results. If you're not depressed enough, it probably won't have an effect. So only a small sample of people are going to actually enter into the study. So if you're too depressed, not too depressed, right? So at the end of the day, only a small band of people with this disease are going to enter the study. However, the drug will be prescribed to everyone on that spectrum. Is that appropriate? Probably not. By the same token, we also have drugs based, everyone's looking at the video now, I know. We have drugs based on just men, or just Caucasians, or just a certain age group, whatever it might be, and yet we apply them to everybody. Very commonly, we have drugs that are assessed for adults, but we just have the dosage for children, and that's problematic as well. So, we talked a bit about this already. Randomized controlled trials are a part of systematic reviews, and we like to think about systematic reviews as being the best kind of evidence, but it's possible to have a truly extraordinary randomized controlled trial that is better than most systematic reviews. Okay, Reiki is another wacky therapy that I get into arguments about. So maybe some of your fans of Reiki, in which case I don't know what to say to you. But it's a thing, right? So if you don't know, Reiki is like distance healing. First there's touching you to heal you, then there's healing you from across the room, and then there's healing you over the phone. Yeah, that's a thing. So there's actually evidence that was used to justify the funding of Reiki training programs for nurses in Boston. And so in fact, the Nursing Association of Boston actually got money from the government to get them trained for it. And the evidence that was used was a randomized controlled trial that showed that the patients enjoyed it. Of course they're going to enjoy it. They enjoy time with nurses. Who doesn't? We've all watched porn. Who said that? And so you can cherry pick your evidence accordingly. That it's not an efficacy test, it's an experiential test. Here you go. Effects of Reiki in clinical practice at systematic review of randomized clinical trials. Conclusion. The evidence is insufficient to suggest that Reiki is an effective treatment. Therefore, the value remains unproven. Then we have this. Every year now, beginning with this event here, in England, there is a mass suicide attempt by overdosing of homeopathic drugs because they're just water, and nothing ever happens to them. So the first case was this individual here who attempted to kill herself by taking homeopathic drugs, rushed to the hospital where she was roundly laughed at because there's nothing there. At the massage school here in Ottawa, I took this photo, homeopathic first aid, which I don't know what to say about this. yeah, I don't know what to say about that. You know, if you're hit by a truck, I don't want you dripping your little droplets of water that's been next to an ambulance. That's weird. And this is recently, finally there's no scientific case for homeopathy. The debate is over. Finally, people are trying to stop money being spent on randomized controlled trials for homeopathy because it wastes time and money. Meanwhile, here at U of T, and I love U of T, right? I give them money, they're my alma mater. They actually have this. They published an open-label pilot study of homeopathic treatment on ADD children, right? And they found 62% had a significant improvement in the primary outcome first occurring after meal. Okay. If you were to just read that study, you say, okay, this is a real study put out by a real university showing that, in fact, a large number of people showed improvement of ADHD from homeopathic treatment. If you read further, you find out there is no control group. So where do you see a problem? Why is that a problem? Think about it in terms of relative risk versus absolute risk. We talked about computing risk. We said that there's a baseline risk for everything. If you don't smoke, you have a chance of getting cancer. If you do smoke, you have a higher chance of getting cancer. If I divide that two, I get a relative risk. So the non-smokers are my control group, or my baseline. Here, this is an uncontrolled trial. We looked at just kids with ADHD who got treatment, and they got better. The thing is, everyone's going to get better anyway. Everybody tends to get better from most things anyway. The question to ask ourselves is, would they get better on this treatment more so than if they did not get the treatment? So there's something a little bit ethically fishy about the study, that they did not have a control group. And in fact, all of U of T's Nobel Prize winners, and a bunch of them, wrote in to complain saying, get this shit off of our university, it's a bit problematic. And what they argued is that this paper, the study, was put out by the pharmacology faculty, which just received a massive grant from Shoppers Drug Mart, which has a homeopathic line treatment. So it's very fishy about the connections there between business and science, right? Off on a tangent. You see what I'm talking about. Stuff is fishy, stuff is problematic. Okay, so I won't bore you too much with this, but here we have 1991, there's no evidence that clinical trials are positive. 2001, meta-analysis showed that, in fact, the effectiveness is poor. 2005, placebo effect. 2007, it keeps on going. Every year, we do more studies on it. But the Homeopathic Society, and this is where I think it's important for those of you who will not go on into health sciences, what you could take away from studying epidemiology is to look at these sites and assess their claims from a rational perspective. The Homeopathy Society will say under proof of homeopathy that a lot of studies have been done on homeopathy, and that's true. That's where they stop. That's their claim of evidence, that a lot of studies have been done, but they don't tell you what the results were. Okay? So that's problematic. The results show that nothing works. So, and here, 4 out of 5 major systematic reviews have concluded that homeopathy has an effect greater than placebo. It's not true. Right? So that's an outright lie. So the lesson here is don't trust websites or news articles. Use your epidemiology skills to assess the studies yourself. Go to that paper I showed you from U of T and see if you could have pulled out the fact it was an uncontrolled trial and see that that's a problem. Okay? Be aware that standard scientific language, like more research is needed, we all say that. We all say that. It doesn't mean anything. It just means a lot more money. That's often used for climate change deniers, for example, to say, the jury's not out. We just want more money. Okay, so don't worry about that. Okay, bottom line. RCT is the gold standard. However, to be perfect is impossible. There are all kinds of flaws that affect interpretability, and they're expensive. All right, that's the first slide deck. We're almost done. We're almost done. Don't worry. I know you want to leave. I know. But we're almost done. We're going to talk a little about randomization, and we'll get out of here. I got to drive to Toronto, so I'm going to leave as well. So I'm not going to hold you too long. So, randomization. What's this? Oh, this was a clinic that we had in the jungles of Guyana a couple of years ago. What we do, we set up these MASH units deep in the rainforest, and patients line up from villages around, all around, to get care. And so we have this one person shows up, and she was like 1 billion years old. We couldn't figure out why. It turned out that whoever wrote down her information first, the time we got there, had, okay, what happened was 2 people used the same information, a mother and a daughter. So the daughter shows up, essentially holds a place in line for the mother, fills out all the form with her information. The mother shows up and gets tested for everything. This like 35-year-old is going to die of old age. What's going on? So that's an example of bad records keeping. That's what I wanted to say. Okay. So here's some pictures from previous years again. The poster presentation, give you a sense of what it looks like. This year, again, it will be different because this year you are projecting your poster onto the screen. So you'll be standing next to it and doing this rather than doing that. Good evening. That's a boring. That's fine. I won't bug you too much. Here you have more stuff. I think I showed you photos already. Yeah. Me. I'll bring this out every year. You'll see the rail bump buckle. It's got something going on. Here we go. Okay. And Ron will be there. He's always the judge every year. Okay. We have prizes every year. We're not sure what it's going to be this year, but that year we actually got sponsored by Mark Walker's lab, and people got cash prizes. Cash money. So it's my grad student giving one out here. Fantastic. Oh, that's interesting. What's going on here? Oh, this is, these are condom hats. And both of these people have gone on to be epidemiologists, by the way, so they've done wonderful things. Okay, today's topic. We covered just now RCTs, we looked a little bit at randomization, placebos, all that wonderful stuff. We're going to go deeper into randomization. So as I mentioned, prior to computers, generating large amounts of random numbers was a lot of work. We actually buy massive textbooks of random numbers. If you don't know, computers even cannot produce truly random numbers. They produce what's called pseudo-random numbers, which is philosophically quite interesting. If a computer can't produce a random number, is randomness really a thing? Right? And if there isn't really a thing, then statistics don't work. If that doesn't work, then what the hell's going on? And so it's really interesting. So I don't really know how they get these random number books anymore if computers can't produce. Look it up. Go look up pseudo-random. It's fascinating stuff. But we have complicated algorithms now instead to produce randomization. Like I said, random number generators are used by computers to produce pseudo-random numbers. It begins with a C. That's not important. But the reason we have randomization in randomized controlled trials is primarily to eliminate bias. Balancing the arms, having the same number of people in each arm is difficult, but randomization is the basis for statistical testing. Okay. Do not confuse randomization with random sampling. What's the difference? Remember this? Remember stats class, random sampling? Remember? Anybody? Bueller? Nobody? No, okay, fine. Wait. So random sampling is if I'm doing a sample study. If, let's say, I want to figure out what the prevalence of the flu is in Canada, and I select a random sample of people who I'm going to test. That's random sampling. This is not that. This is a randomization. Randomization is when I allocate randomly subjects to treatment arms in an experiment. So keep those terms separate. So it's important that we create, when we randomize, equally sized groups, equally sized arms we call them, more or less equally sized. And there are all kinds of randomization methods that create all kinds of biases. So there's something called the birthday method, where we say, well, whoever got the most recent birthday will be in this group versus that group. And that can be problematic if you have the thing you're studying is seasonal, if it only affects people that are born in a certain month or something like that. That's possible. Sometimes you have a dated presentation, meaning whoever shows up that day gets into this group, whoever shows up on Thursdays gets into that group. Those aren't great methods. We have complete and simple randomization. So simple randomization is essentially flipping a coin. Okay? So heads treatment, tails control, and it's intuitive, but it does not guarantee balance. meaning that it's possible for me to get 20 heads in a row, 5 tails, and so forth. What we find is that anything less than 200, you're pretty much guaranteed to have dramatically different size arms using this simple method. So if it's, a couple thousand people, then on average it'll even out somewhat, but very few studies are over 200 people. On the other hand, we have something called block randomization. And block randomization, I'll describe to you now, ensures balance. So this is how it works. What you don't want is bad luck. You don't want completely unbalanced samples. You don't want worse luck with like everybody in one group and nobody in the other one. What you want is exactly equal distributions. So let's say there are two treatment groups, A and B, and say A gets the drug and B doesn't get the drug. A gets the treatment, B gets the placebo. For every 4 people, there are 6 ways of arranging them, like this. The first 2 can be in my treatment group, and the next 2 can be my control group. I can go treatment, control, control. I can go ABBA, treatment, control, treatment, and this, and that, and this, and so forth. That's it. Those are entirely the only ways that 4 people can be distributed. So it is convenient that that number is 6, because we have in our possession a way of randomizing 6 things. That thing is called a die. 6-sided die. Dice is plural, right? 1 die, 2 dice? I was getting confused. Thank you so much. So, if I were to roll a die, I can get one of these options for distributing 4 people. And for each one of these 4 people, I get an equal number of people in my treatment and my control group. So this is block randomization. I'm randomizing not the individuals, but the blocks. In this case, blocks of 4 people. Very convenient. So after every 4 patients, I'm guaranteed balance, because after every 4, I get equal numbers of A's, equal numbers of B's. So this is how it works. Let's say I'm going to randomize all of you into my study. So the first 4 people come to me, 1, 2, 3, 4. I roll the die, and I get a 3. 3 is ABBA, which means you're going to be A, you're going to be B, you're going to be B, you're going to be A. Right? Next 4 come, 1, 2, 3, 4. I roll the die again, and I get 1. So you're going to be A, you're going to be A, you're going to be B, you're going to be, and so forth. And I do that for every 4 people. That way, by the time I've exhausted everybody, guaranteed you have been randomly allocated to one group or another, and there are equal numbers of people. It only works, of course, if my total number is divisible by 4. So I've got to make sure that's the case. Okay. So that's block randomization. There's something called stratified randomization. So let's say that I know it matters if you're a male or female. Do migraines again, migraine drugs, because women get more migraines than men. I don't want to have all women on this side and all men on that side, or a dramatically imbalanced sample. So what I'll do is I'm going to make sure that I randomize the men first and guarantee balance, and the women first and guarantee balance, and so forth. So I can combine the two. I can, let's say I'm randomizing by age. I'm saying that I want to make sure that equal numbers of young and old people. I do my ABBA-BABA thing for young people first, and the ABBA-BABA for the old people first. Okay, that way, for every characteristic that I know is important, I'm going to block randomize them. So these are called stratifications. I'm stratifying my randomization by the criteria that I care about. And as I said before, the ones that I don't know about, the characteristics that I don't know that I should care about, are hopefully distributed somewhat equally due to the randomization process. And that's the main reason that we randomize, to make sure we have a higher chance of equal distribution of factors that I don't know about. So we talked about reliability and validity in the past. In the screening test, it was this, right? Screening test is validity is whether the test is detecting what it says it's detecting, and reliability is whether it gets the same result all the time. So I can say, hey, your hair length is a test for intelligence. And every time I test your hair length, I get an intelligence reading. It's reliable, but it's not valid. It doesn't mean anything. Hair length is not related to, because I'm a genius and I got tiny hair. So it has nothing to do with that. So that would be an invalid test. For studies, validity is the extent to which the conclusions drawn from the study are warranted. Now, there are 2 kinds of validity, internal and external. We'll talk about that in a second. Reliability still means the same thing. I get the same results from the study reliably. So the two kinds of validity are internal and external. With internal validity, essentially what we're saying is what we observe is in the study. Is it real within the study? Is the odds ratio, the relative risk, is it real? Is the relationship between these two variables real? Sure, okay? With external is, can it be applied to everybody else? I'll give you an example. I have a dog named Sherlock. It's one of his 6 names. That's one of his names. His dog named Sherlock. He's a poodle. It's adorable. Okay, so you can say that, hey, all professors named Raywat have dogs named Sherlock, and your sample is me. So you test your sample and you say, well, his name is Raywat. He has a dog? Yes. The dog's name is Sherlock. That's great. So internally, that observation is valid. That's a real relationship. My dog's name is Sherlock. Absolutely. It's not externally valid because not all professors named Ray have dogs named Sherlock. It's not a valid conclusion externally. So internally, is the relationship real? Externally, is it generalizable? It is possible to be so specific in your definitions internally that it is no longer applicable to the outside world. That is the art of science, to make sure that you haven't controlled things so extremely that you cannot generalize any further. So one way to make sure that you are internally valid is to control for confounders. Confounding is one of the great threats to validity. So something is internally valid if the causal relationship is well demonstrated. So in that case, yeah, I own a dog named Sherlock. That's real. I can disturb that. The major threat is confounding. And really, if you've got these 3 characteristics, you've got pretty good internal validity. Temporality. I had my name before I got the dog, and now I got the dog, right? Covariation. Yes, 100%. This professor owns a dog named Sherlock. Non-spuriousness. It's not a cat. I know it's been tested, right? So those 3 things more or less guarantee internal validity. With external validity, we have the problem with specificity. Was the study overly specific to one person or place? Well, yes, it's specific to me and me alone, so it's not externally valid. Or is a placebo effect going on? And here, this is where these 2 factors come into play with external validity, is the Hawthorne and Rosenthal effects. So keep those 2 things separate, internal and external validity. With qualitative studies, they have something called transferability. This is their version of external validity. So it's not so much, because with qualitative studies, and I'm going off on a tangent here, they are not claiming to be generalizable to begin with. Because if I interview 6 people, I can't really make conclusions about everybody else. But I'm learning some things about the world by interviewing 6 people. But there's something about transferability where on the insights gleaned here, applicable to another group of 6 people from a similar sample. Okay, there's a whole host of validity types. I'm going to go over just a couple of them. One is ecological validity. Ecological validity sounds like external validity. It's very, very similar, but it's more about, is the study applicable to the real world? And the example I'll give you is this. I think I got this from Wikipedia, I'm not sure. So let's say you are doing a study of jury behaviors in criminal trials. You're trying to see, is it rational that these juries made these decisions in criminal trials? And you've gone through a whole list of previous trials. You've got the jury transcripts and all the presentations given in court, and you've selected a whole new series of juries, and you're going to see if these people behave the same. But instead of reenacting the trial, you're just going to read out what the testimony was. So instead of having a judge here in a courtroom, or in their suits, and the jury and that, you're going to sit around a classroom, and I'm going to read, well, the accused said this, then the trial judge said this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then we'll see if the jury agrees with the findings. The problem there is while the actual information presented to the jury members is the same, the context is different. Maybe they're being influenced by the bright lights of the courtroom. Maybe they're being influenced by the wig and the robe of the judge, or by the handsomeness of the trial lawyer, whatever it might be. Okay? So there are things that aren't innate to the information provided that are nonetheless relevant, that have been left out. and that is ecologically invalid. So ecological validity has to do with the setting and the context of the study. Is it applicable to the real world? Not so much of the relationship, which is what external validity is about. We usually see this in psychology. Okay, consider this now. There are two towns, Rosenthal and Gomezland, okay? And one of them receives a radio broadcast on how to boil turbid water. So let's say they're both in a country where water quality is an issue. And every now and then people get sick from the bad water. Turbid water is like gross water, okay? And people need to know when to boil it or not. And Gomezland does not receive the radio broadcast of how, who knows, I mean, who doesn't know how to boil water? But okay, maybe it's a dumb community, they don't know how to boil water. So this group gets the radio broadcast, and this group doesn't. And then, a month later, we compare rates of waterborne diseases to see if the radio intervention was effective. What kind of study is this? First of all, is it observational, meaning are they doing things naturally, or was there intervention? Is there intervention? Yes, there is, radio broadcast. Were they randomized? No, they weren't. They're stuck in these groups. So what is this? This is something that we call a special kind of experiment. It is an experiment because I intervened. I gave these people a radio broadcast. This is what's called a quasi-experiment. Quasi-experiments are like randomized controlled trials, but there's no random assignment. It's like whatever you got, that's what you get. The problem is that it's possible for somebody in Rewattville there to drive to or call up his cousin Gomez and hey, I heard this radio broadcast, you should boil your water. So there's contamination possibilities. The thing is that this is an extremely powerful and common design, especially in evaluation. Because we didn't randomly assign, we have a threat to internal validity. Okay? Because we didn't control for confounding here. We don't know why these people chose to boil the water or why they got their waterborne disease numbers up or down. So internal validity is at jeopardy here. But quasi-designs are extremely common. Go to PubMed and type in quasi-experiment designs. They're really common for evaluating social programs, especially in poor parts of the world. Right? So if I want to start, hey, as an HIV educational campaign or an anti-smoking campaign, whatever it might be, that's how we assess their effectiveness with quasi-experimental design. So if you want to go into evaluation sciences or public policy, mastering the quasi-experimental design is a useful skill to have. Okay, why? Because sometimes we can't randomize. I cannot tell you, go live in that town and not that town. I cannot tell you, listen to this radio broadcast and don't tell anybody about it. Or don't never go to that town, never listen to the radio broadcast. I can't control for these things. But maybe quasi-experimental designs improve external validity. How might they improve external validity? Yeah.
Well, it's not randomized, so it's more like the natural world and how people behave.
It's like the real world, exactly. Because in the real world, you're going to hear some shit. So we may as well just try it out in the real world and see if these people hear some stuff, maybe it works, okay? Now, what's a natural experiment? I told you about my first job interview post-PhD that I totally screwed up with the Atomic Energy Commission, remember that, right? And they asked me to compute a triple rate, and I did it by random miracle. They also asked me, if you had to collect data on radiation exposure at a population level, how would you do so? Well, I don't know, I couldn't think of anything. He said, well, the actual answer was there were natural experiments that made the data possible. Those natural experiments are things like the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. Okay? As tragic and horrible as those things are, they happened, and so the data is there. So a natural experiment is like a quasi-experiment, except that you didn't do the experiment, someone else did. It's slightly different from an observational study because even though things are unfolding and you didn't do it, someone did it. Someone dropped the bomb. Another example would be that's not the one. If you were to show up and decide to examine the effects of a smoking ban legislation and comparing two different towns, that's kind of like a quasi-experiment, except you didn't do it. You didn't enact that law. You just showed up and said, well, that town's got anti-smoking laws and this one doesn't. And we'll look at their cancer rates. That would be a natural experiment because someone enacted those laws. It wasn't you. Okay? So the allocation happens naturally, meaning that someone did the thing for you. It's a difficult distinction between quasi-experiments, natural experiments, and sometimes a cohort design. So if you're comparing two communities with similar demographics, one has a smoking ban, one doesn't, you follow to see what happens. See, it sounds like a cohort state, isn't it? But it isn't, because somebody chose to enact the smoking ban. And the same with, of course, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's offensive that things like earthquakes, earthquakes are tough one, because earthquakes, one could argue, are natural, or not imposed by somebody, but disasters in general lend themselves well to natural experiments. Okay, something new. Let's say that you're doing a fitness test on 100 random people, right? And you're going to rank them from the most unfit to the most fit. Fantastic. Then you do the same test again for the 50 poorest people a couple days later. How will they respond in terms of fitness levels? The 50 most unfit people a couple days later, will they improve, get worse, or no change? What do you think? Yes? They're going to improve, exactly. And if you retest the best people, are they going to improve, no difference, or get worse? They're going to get worse a little bit. The reason for this is something we call regression to the mean. That is, that everybody eventually tries to become the median, or the mean, the average. Okay, and this observation came from observing biological systems as really tall things kind of get shorter, really short things get higher, we all kind of get to the middle somehow. And what this means is that any variability that you see is probably noise. You have to have reliability in your studies, you repeat them regularly so that extreme measures are averaged out over time. And this was first described by Francis Galton in the 19th century. So you have to be wary of extreme findings. They're often not real. And you can read about more details over here. So this is your homework. This is the famous Salk vaccine trial. The Salk vaccine treats what disease? Polio, thank you, French polio. So this is the actual data from the first trials. This was the RCT. So I just want you to create your 2x2 table, state the null hypothesis to be tested, and then compute the relative risk for getting polio after getting Salk vaccine. Right? A very simple procedure, but I just want you to be able to look at this and create a 2x2 contingency table. All right, everyone looks exhausted, myself included. So we will stop there. See you next week.